All right, welcome back, grade 10s. Now we're going to be looking at the Industrial Revolution, which is our second last topic in the unit on historical globalization. Some of the concepts we're about to see, we've already discussed this week, beginning with mercantilism, also referred to as mercantilism. What we've seen through the movie Gandhi is that mercantilism is an economic policy that is designed to maximize your exports, minimize your imports. It's a game being played between the major powers of Europe. They see the world in a zero-sum reality. What that means is, if I am trying to gain power, then my opponents in the game, so for the English, the opponents would be the French, the Dutch, they can't be gaining power at the same time. So there's this mentality that there's a limited amount of wealth or power in the world. So therefore, we must create these exclusive economic zones. So for the British, they end up taking control of India. Ultimately, once they have started creating colonies around the world, they also begin to go through the Industrial Revolution, and then they need more raw materials, the building blocks of the Industrial Revolution, and they need marketplaces for those manufactured goods. And that will only further their need for more colonies. So India plays a role of not only feeding or fueling the Industrial Revolution, but providing a market for the goods produced in the factory towns of Manchester and Leeds in England. That's one of the takeaways from the Gandhi video we watched, and one of the segues into this lesson on the Industrial Revolution. In the grade 12 textbook, there's a great quote from Richard Hooker about the Industrial Revolution. And the first sentence is simply referring back to the Neolithic Revolution and saying the Industrial Revolution is the most significant thing that happened in our shared history since the Neolithic Revolution. And similar to the Neolithic Revolution, the Industrial Revolution can't be placed on a calendar and say, oh, it happened on that date. It's not a revolution like the French or the American or the Russian revolutions that are very date specific. The Industrial Revolution, the dates of it will vary depending upon what country you're in. It's going to begin in England in the 1760s. It won't come to America until after the War of 1812. It won't go to Japan until the 1870s after Commodore Perry opens Japan up. And there's still some countries today in the world that are just beginning their Industrial Revolution. They're developing, they're not developed countries. So the Industrial Revolution is a concept that cannot be tied to a single date. But it is, as this quote is showing us, a significant transformation. In order to look at how it transformed us, we can look at the details. We can unpack the details in the second sentence. The consequence of this revolution would change human labor. What does that mean? How did human labor change? So I asked you guys to think about this over the night. How did human labor change? Yes.
A lot of jobs that people had that were very time consuming became a lot easier and we needed less people to do certain jobs.
Yeah, so there was a change in production. It meant we needed less people because people were being replaced by machines. So a key to this change in human labor is the mechanization of human labor. So if this was a history course, we might be studying all the inventions. So this is the Eli Whitney created the spinning jenny. And this is what the spinning jenny did, and this is how it took some weavers out of business. Well, we're not memorizing the machines here. We're studying the significance of the revolution itself. It's going to change human labor. We're going to have less people employed because they're going to be using machines to end up being able to be more productive. We're also going to allow a new round of specialization. Rather than working in what used to be called the cottage industry, where you might have a master craftsperson working on a door, and they build the entire part of that door. In a door factory, you might have a single task in a line of 15 or 20 workers. And speaking from experience working in a door factory, I'm probably not able to build a door, but I really understood that first process. So we're going to have specialization of labor that'll lead to mass production. Of course, we're recording, so someone's going to phone. Good morning, Katie. Okay. Yeah. Bye. So specialization of labor is going to unlock more opportunity for mass production, which kind of leads us into the next comment about consumption. So we're also going to see a new round or an explosion of consumption. So let's think about that. How did consumption change? How did consumption change? Well, there used to be products that were exclusively available for the rich, the elite. But now, because of mass consumption, the per unit cost was going down, becoming more affordable for the masses. So one part of consumption changes is that some products that used to be exclusively available for the elite now become affordable for others. Now, what if I told you that pineapples used to be a symbol of wealth? That people actually used to rent pineapples and take them to parties and put them on display as a sign of their wealth. Pineapples are about $3.99 right now. $3.99. Nobody's renting them. Nobody's taking them to a party and putting them out there and just say, look how wealthy I am. I have a pineapple. At least I've rented one for the evening. My question for you is, how did the Industrial Revolution allow us to consume pineapples at such a more cost-affordable rate? How come we can all basically afford pineapples now? What happened? Yes?
More people started to learn how to grow pineapples, or they started to do more to make a good climate for the pineapples to grow and stuff.
So we can manipulate the earth to increase the amount of earth that can grow pineapples, and we can also educate others on how to grow pineapples. So one thing that could happen is the supply for pineapples went up. Supply went up as we manipulated the earth or as we educated others on how to create more pineapples. That's definitely part of it. Yes?
There was more like trade between countries, and like a lot of tropical fruit you can easily access because of the factories in the countries it grows in its fruit.
Yeah, so if a pineapple comes from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, it can make it to Canada and not spoil along the way. Because of the Industrial Revolution, we have steamships and railways, and therefore I don't have to consume locally. So how has consumption changed? I'm now a global consumer. That Russ McBride literally gets to benefit from the bounty of the entire planet. You know, I can have Russian caviar and Spanish meat. You go to Spain, they have all this like processed lean meat, like sliced meat. It's delicious. French baguettes. I could have
Chinese food.
Chinese just food, right? Like not a specific thing like the dumpling, but just Chinese food. I could have Japanese sushi. I could have Irish beer, some Guinness. Yeah, I am a global consumer, and ironically, I eat none of those things because they're all disgusting.
Oh, you're not a global consumer.
You don't
No.
like Chinese food?
I eat Chinese food, but not dumplings. We went to Xi'an in 2008, and they gave us like just round after round of dumplings, and it's like, oh, I can't eat any more dumplings. And dumplings, I mean, I don't know if you've had dumplings, but dumplings, they can be filled with anything, and could be amazing. But after like the 50th different dumpling, I met my dumpling quota. I was dumpling out. I don't know why I keep saying dumpling. I should probably move on. So consumption. What if you wanted to make the argument that because of the Industrial Revolution, we've unlocked mass production, and it has led to mass consumption, and as an externality, a consequence of it, we've created some kind of doomsday device, some kind of negative impact on the ecology, the biosphere. What is your physical manifestation that mass consumption has created mass waste? If you wanted to show me that, what would you show me? Show me the mass waste. Where would we go? Yeah.
Well, with a lot of the entire earth is filled with landfills.
Yeah,
Climate
take me to the dump, which is a new country song, by the way. Take me to the dump. Yeah, let's go to the garbage dump. And you can see that people throw things away. That microwave over there was meant to be thrown away 5 years ago, and I said, no, it still works. Let's put it in my room, and then I can microwave up my bread and mustard and enjoy all the luxuries the world offers me. That's an example that people just throw things away. Oh, there's a new iPhone out. Well, my old iPhone still works, but I want the new one because it's the pineapple of the day. It's the status provider, right? The signal of my social structure. So, yeah, consumption, maybe mass consumption has been negative, and we can see that by going to the dump. I used to love going to the dump and like just scavenging and saying, oh man, look at these cool things. It's like shopping for free, right? But they don't like you to do that here in Wetaskiwin. They don't like you to go to the dump and pick. But there's lots of valuable things that people throw away because they just want a newer version of it. The old thing still works. You know, I think I have a TV from the early 90s that still works. It's like 7,000 pounds because it's massive, but the screen's tiny. Still works though, but what do I do with it? What do you do with it? You just do deadlifts with it, right? You can use it for weights. It's cheaper than weights. Family structure. This is a tough one. How did family structure change as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution? I don't know if you guys were able to come up with an answer. You know, the two of you that have been helping me today. Yes?
It's more focused on like at least one or maybe both of the what would be parents to focus on getting getting a job to provide for a family, even though like before you didn't, only one of them you provide and such.
Yeah, so today in 2021, it's tough to be a single parent family and have enough money to buy for all those things that we either need or want. That's a long-term consequence. That's a long-term consequence. I was thinking more short-term. So if we go back into the 19th century, what ends up happening is, the factory owners, they're motivated by one thing. What is the thing that they want more than anything else? Yes. Money, profit, right? So they want profit, and one of the things that they can control is the cost of labor. Men make more money than women. Let's hire women instead of men. Children make more money than women. Let's hire children. So how does that change the social or the family structure? Well, there's a lot of unemployed men. And they go from being the primary breadwinner to kind of a burden for the family. Because now dad's unemployed. And in England, a pub culture will be created as the unemployed men go to the pub during the day while their children go to work. And when I say children, I'm not, exaggerating, calling a 17-year-old a child. I'm talking about, some children that are under the age of 6 working 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. Cleaning fireplaces, working in the mines, sweeping those chimneys, or cheaping those swimneys. I don't know where I was going with that. But yes, there's some jobs that children, because of their size, are uniquely advantaged for, and they're working. So, and this is strange to think of, but there are some 5 and 6-year-old kids that begin to have their epiphany and say, Mom and Dad aren't working. I go to work for 18 hours a day. I come home. Why? I should have my own house. So we do have this redefinition of the family, and we have some children that become independent. They say, forget this. I'm not going to support my family. Why would I work all day so my dad can go to the pub? So we have the whole idea of the family structure is redefined during this era because it's no longer a father or a dad-centered unit. Social structure changes. How did social structure change? Well, in order to answer that, we have to consider what was social structure like before the Industrial Revolution. So what do we call the people on top of society before the Industrial Revolution? They were the nobles. Yeah, the nobles. So because of the Industrial Revolution, we're going to have a class of new nobles. And they're going to achieve their nobility not by conquering somebody in battle, but they're going to achieve their nobility by becoming wealthy economically. So these new nobles are the capitalists, the factory owners. And the French would call them, and because I'm so fluent in French, the nouveau riche, right? The nouveau riche. Karl Marx calls them the bourgeoisie. And the nouveau riche, the bourgeoisie, they will be criticized as being robber barons. You're only noble, a baron, because you're robbing wealth from the workers. So social structure is going to be flipped as new people within communities will emerge that suddenly we have a lot of attraction to. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, when they were your age, they lived in middle-class families. Now they are the two wealthiest individuals on earth. And when they come into a room, people adore them. They put a lot of value in Jeff or Elon Musk. Some people think Elon is like a visionary for our future if we will have one as a species. Why do we put so much wealth or value attached to these individuals? Because of their social value, right? Social value has been redefined. It's not the Duke or the Duchess or the Baron or the Earl of something that we value now. It's who has a lot of economic wealth. Yes?
Well, technically, couldn't it also be like the queen and everyone, because we technically still do have a queen.
We have a queen for sure, but not everybody does. Right? We do, Canada does, and some Canadians don't want to continue that. But even if we have a queen, many countries don't have a monarchy, and even the queen has been quite vocal this week. Usually she doesn't talk a lot. She's like 96, right? But this week she's been criticizing world leaders for not doing enough to address climate change. And I mean, how many people in here have heard that the Queen was saying that this week? So 2 hands went up. How many people have been, hearing what Elon Musk is up to? Okay, you guys, I need more hands to be up to make my point valid. What I'm going to try to say there is we put more value in what he says than what she says. And she's an exception. She's a queen that's been in power for 60 years. If Prince Charles said something this week, or Prince Andrew, who's guilty of being a pervert, right, who should be in jail, we don't put a lot of value in those nobles. So, social structures change. The final thought here, and even the very soul of the individual. Before the Industrial Revolution, during feudalism, people lived in a village. It was the same village that their ancestors had always lived in. As Edmund Burke would say, we lived in a great chain of being. And you could look down the chain, and in the same village, that's where all your family had ever lived, and you're assuming that's where your family would always live. So when you look around the village, you basically see your history and your future, because that's where your grandchildren will find their spouses. So you're a very collective identified people. The village was your identity. But because of the Industrial Revolution, people left their villages, moved to the cities, got factory jobs, and then they stopped seeing themselves as a we and started seeing themselves as a me. The Industrial Revolution will change our very soul from collectivism to individualism. From collectivism into individualism. Now we have a lot of selfishness instead of selflessness. We still have some selfless people in the world, but they're always remarkable when you meet them because they seem so different. I have another quote that I asked you to consider yesterday. The Industrial Revolution will be remembered as the moment when humanity lost its soul and we abandoned each other in the blind pursuit of selfish profit. That is saying the exact same thing that the last one ended with. Each day, our porous skin opens less and less to fresh air, sunlight, the touch of others, the smell of pine, rain, compost, manure. So that first part of that sentence, trying to show how natural things used to be. Nothing more natural than manure, right? Yeah, that's the smell of money. That is the smell of money when it's in the air. So we have this idea that, we've abandoned nature and we've replaced it with something that's not natural, which is machines. And instead we find ourselves hunched over machines in the standard posture of reverence. So that term reverence is key because it's like we're worshiping the machine. Our love and our devotion is going to a machine. It's an artificial thing to be devoted to. Bowing our heads to the humming and warm computer pets rest on our laps or in our palms. So what this is meant to be exposing is the consequences of the Industrial Revolution, how it has changed us, how it has created an artificial reality. And I would argue that within your lifetime, maybe not mine, but within your lifetime, people will be entering into whatever they're going to call it, the metaverse. They will be willfully creating singularity with digital technology, and they will simply go online and stay online. They're going to upload their intelligence. That they might achieve immortality, but they might also achieve immorality. You might be able to live forever as a part of the matrix, but what are we losing? Well, we're losing these things. So there's a juxtaposition here, right? There's a contrast between what we had and what we're making, and the point of, or the perspective of the source is, we have lost nature in this trade as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Now, it's not suggesting we can go back, but it's suggesting that we should be noting when our phones tell us every Sunday that, your time online has been up by 10%, and that means that you have been on your phone for an average of 5 hours a day, then people might be like, oh, maybe that's a little bit too much. This is a tool, it's a device, but what the source is trying to expose is that for some people, it's becoming their existence. We have children today, and that's the last point. We are breeding a new generation of human beings which will learn more from the machine than their mothers. We have children today, infants, that are showing signs of neglect. They are smaller than they should be. They're less mentally developed than they should be, because when they look to their parents, they don't see their parents. They see their parents like this, right? They see their parents online. So early on, babies need a lot of FaceTime. Not FaceTime, like, hey, what are you doing? Ah! But FaceTime, they need to see mom and dad so they can experience those and establish those bonds. But we have lots of children that are showing signs of neglect because when they look to mom or look to dad, mom and dad aren't really looking at them. They're playing some game on their phone because they want to get to the next level. They're on level 216 and they want to get to 217. So we have some sources that expose the problems of the Industrial Revolution. Here we have an argument that because of the Industrial Revolution, as a consequence of it, the burden of the capitalist at the top has been carried by the worker at the bottom. She is a child, so it's exposing the problem of child exploitation. It's challenging globalization because as a response to globalization, this exploitation, or as a result of it, this exploitation has been created. He is a factory owner, so the factories are at the back. And some people would agree with this. Last year you guys studied economics, and perhaps you saw the name Karl Marx. Karl Marx would look at this source and say, this is why the workers will have an epiphany, and they'll break off the chains of oppression, because the capitalists are exploited, because they're robbing the value of the workers. But others, like Robert Owen, might agree that capitalists are exploitive, but Owen owned a factory in New Lanark in Scotland, and he said no. They don't need a revolution. They don't need a civil war. The capitalists at the top, they're the ones who need to have an epiphany, because in his factory town, Robert Owen decided he was going to become the change that the world needed. So Robert Owen offered those children, instead of employment, education and healthcare and leisure activity. And he offered those things for his workers as well. So he paid his workers more than market wage, provided the things that today we'd assume government to provide, and he did that because he recognized the problem shown in that source, and he said that I needed to be the solution as the capitalist. So this fits in with the problem that a child is meant to learn and not earn, but what we're seeing at that time is children were earning and not learning. That although the most common age at this factory was 21 and over, almost half of them started under the age of 10. So this shows us that children are employed at the factory, and once they begin there, they don't really move on to something better. At WCHS, we always want you to move on to bigger and better things. Here, the children start working at the factory under the age of 10, and that's it. That's it. So it's not the argument that, Adam Smith might say that no, it's a good thing. These workers are getting skills and they'll be able to, unlock new opportunities. This kind of shows me the opposite. It shows me that once they're there, they stay there. So one of the skills that you need next week is relationship building on your A1. And in those three sources, we're seeing this relationship, a linear relationship. You guys are quite good at creating to what extent questions and answering them, but another relationship I need on an A1, and remember your A1 is already released online for you to look at, and you can bring in a planning sheet, but another relationship is what we call a linear tapestry. You take some nuances of one source, attach it to another, and attach it to the third. So for these three that we just saw, the exploitation of the weak, young, and impoverished is how the factory owners became wealthy during the Industrial Revolution. Child labor was about control and domination. Children were meant to carry heavy loads, as is the case in Source 1. But the creator of the source was well aware the burden was too much, which was a sentiment shared with the creator of Source 2. Children should be children and let them learn and play, whereas Source 3 explores the reality that unfortunately this did not happen. Profit was more important. Children could not learn, Source 2. They were burdened with work, Source 1, from a very young age, Source 3. So next week on the A1, I want to see a linear tapestry woven through the sources. Take some elements of the sources and connect them together. That's another level of relationship building. But some people might look at these pictures and sources and say, wait a minute, you're creating a bias here. A capitalist would look at this and say, no, what I see here isn't oppression or exploitation. I see a child with a purpose. And unfortunately, I look to my students, and I see a lot of students that would rather not be here. WCHS may not be where you want to be. You don't even want to be in school. You'd rather be earning and learning at the same time. So maybe our current public school system has failed you, because schools can often feel like a prison, and you're forced to be here rather than having a choice to be here. So some people might look at him and say, well, he has a choice. He's not forced to do this job. He's learning a skill. He's earning a wage. He's probably helping his family pay the bills. He is, finding his role in the community. It's very rewarding. A lot of you might not feel that rewarded going to WCHS daily. So we look at this and we throw in our biases and say, well, that's horrible. He's being exploited. But a capitalist would say, well, wait a minute. Might that be a better existence? Now, the reality is we still have children being exploited today. We have more slaves today than at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. And unfortunately, you are their master. Your lifestyle, the consumer choices you make, are the reason why they are enslaved. Sometimes they're literal slaves, sometimes they're pseudo-slaves like we saw in the 19th century in America. And this will be my last point. So in the 19th century in the United States, we had a civil war fought to free the slaves of the South. But the problem of the slaves in the North was ignored. And that problem remains today. And the reality is that in the North, children, mostly Irish by the way, were sometimes purchased but most often just basically employed by capitalists as an opportunity to rob them of their wealth so that the capitalists could become more wealthy. It's very common for these children to be paid, for example, 5 cents a week, and then at the end of the week, they would get a bill for 10 cents. Here's for the shelter and the food that I provided for you. So they weren't slaves because they were free, but they entered into a contract with the capitalist industrial factory owner to work for him for 5 cents a week, but then they also had to pay for room and board, which was 10 cents. So they became a quasi-pseudo-slave. And I would argue that this still remains today around the world. So we have a different level of servitude, a different level of slavery. So we freed the slaves with the 13th and 14th Amendment after the Civil War, but in the North, those who fought against slavery, they employed tens of thousands of Irish children that they bought and put into contracts and paid them 5 cents a week and charged them 10 cents to work for them. And nobody talks about that. So that's the ugly part of the Industrial Revolution, is that these capitalists, how did they become so wealthy? By exploiting children. And that's where we'll pick it up on Monday.